Greetings and salutations, and welcome to our last session of our final day of the 24th Annual Caribbean American Legislative Forum. I am Dr. Karen Nelson. I am the founding president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies and the chief visionary officer of its operations. We're here in this 24th annual year in a conversation on how do we as diaspora help to shape a future of well-being and inclusive prosperity for the region. This week, we have spent a lot of time engaging in dialogue, but not just dialogue, meaningless dialogue, but dialogue that is aimed at designing and directing our energies towards practical solutions that we might implement on the ground, as well as advocate for here in the United States of America, which is our second home. We have looked at domestic issues of justice, education, health, and economic development. And likewise, we have looked at, over the course of the past week, education, health, and economic prosperity across the region. We've also looked at disaster resilience, and perhaps we can see the tie-in of disaster resilience in the natural environment to the tie-in of disaster resilience in terms of the man-made environment of our social infrastructure. And so today we have spent all day looking at the social infrastructures and how they impact on our mental and human security, from border security, through citizen security, through cyber security, and through human trafficking, all the various social ills that drive against our achievement of well-being in our society. In this session, we will deal with the issue of corruption and transparency. It's very important. In fact, I might say it's a fundamental topic that we as diaspora must come to grips with and learn more in order to provide support for our family, colleagues, and friends on the ground. If we are to engage in creating economic and inclusive prosperity socially across all boundaries in the region, we must have to first confer freedom to the region. And by that, I mean freedom from fear of the law and to ensure we have the rule of law in full operation. So we have Attorney Wilfred Rattigan, or counselor, as we like to say, retired FBI executive with us, and he will be chairing and championing this conversation. I really hope that we can make it a rich conversation. And just to make note, we're supposed to be joined for a brief interlude with the Assistant Deputy Secretary of State, Ms. Barbara Feinstein, and when she comes on, I'll let you know. But we're going to go ahead and start introducing our panelists and introducing the topics, because what we want to leave here with today, and I want to say very clearly, is the beginnings of a design for an initiative that is regional, that is about creating just futures for a civil society in the Caribbean. And by civil, I don't mean just civil society NGOs, but civilization in the Caribbean region. With that, Attorney Wilfred Rattigan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson. Yes, and to my fellow panelists and everyone who's listening, I have a great deal of familiarity with this subject. However, before I delve into that, what I'd like to do is just to give a brief background and then have my panelists go through the same thing. As Dr. Nelson mentioned, my name is Wilfred Rattigan, born and raised in Jamaica, worked with the FBI as a special agent for 30 years, served overseas in several embassies, and actually participated in investigating public corruption. Mr. Collins, floor is yours, sir. Dr. Nelson.
As he unmuted.
I am now allowed to unmute. I was struggling in vain. It was telling me the host has blocked me. Good afternoon, all. Good afternoon, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please turn on your camera as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, I have. Wonderful. And so, shall I introduce myself?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Frederick Collins. I am the president of Transparency Institute Guyana, Inc. That is the local affiliate of Transparency International. And this affiliate has been in existence from around 2011. So we're just about 11 years old. The affiliate in Jamaica, which is headed by Dr. Monroe, is senior to ours, and so is our partner in Trinidad. But we are representing Transparency International. I'm the president, and I've been in the seat for about, this is going to be my let's say my third year in the job. So that's about it. And of course, Guyana, of course.
All right, thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Burton, I see you've joined us. Welcome. Please, a brief introduction.
She's having a problem.
Hi, everybody. I'm here. No need to tell me I'm having any technical difficulties, Mr. Herb Nelson. How is everybody doing? All right. So I am Zara Burton. I am a reporter, investigative reporter with 18 Degrees North here in Kingston, Jamaica. I broadcast, usually anyway, throughout the entire Caribbean, but in recent years, we've actually launched our online newsletter, and it's at Substack, the platform 18dn.substack.com. People can sign up if they want to see the investigative reports that we do, and we tackle issues of corruption, which is why I think you guys were so gracious to invite me today to this forum to help to contribute and to enlighten and also to be enlightened. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Is Ms. Calder with us?
He had to pull out. So
I see Mr. Sheridan. Is that Gregor? How do you pronounce your surname, sir?
Yeah, that is Sheridan Gregoire here.
Okay.
I'm in Canada at the moment. I'm president of a newly formed organization, newly established in the state of Georgia. It's called the NIDCLIF, which is Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation. So I presume that you can see the name speaks for itself. We're primarily Dominicans, and many of us live outside of Dominica. Some are in Dominica, but we are concerned about certain things that are taking place in our country to do with the human rights and civil liberties of people down there, and a lot of abuse and so on. We're concerned about abuse of women and children and seniors. And so we formed this organization registered in Atlanta. We have 501c3 status, and certainly because we're new, we're looking to make friends, kind of affiliates, and to see how can help us in our cause. So happy to be here this afternoon, Dr. Nelson.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Abdul?
I don't think he's logged on yet.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's proceed. Again, my name is Wilfred Rattigan, retired FBI agent. And let me start by just, and I know most of you know this, but I think it's a good way to start with just giving you a definition of how the FBI views public corruption. And we don't call it corruption, they call it public corruption. And it involves a breach of trust. That's the first element. And that breach of trust comes about when an official, whether it's elected or appointed, when they ask, demand, solicit, accept, agrees, or receive anything of value in return for being influenced in the performance of their official duties. That's the FBI's definition, and that's a definition I worked with for about 30 years. Now, to introduce the subject, let me just give you a brief incident that I was involved with. I was assigned to an FBI office overseas. In fact, I was in charge of the office, charge of the region. And it came to my attention that there was a huge corruption scheme that involved Americans and possibly the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. My office and we conducted a preliminary investigation. It turned out to be much more than that. And then we found out that the facts did show that there was massive corruption. The problem was that it involved host country government. And so when I approached the ambassador, as is the process, and I explained to him, I produced the evidence. He said to me, you need to shut this thing down because of the relationship between the US and that particular country and the government. He said, there's no way we could allow this to go forward because it would have brought down the entire government. And there was a lot of uncertainty about a replacement government. And so I sat there with all these files. You know, I was very proud of the work I did, not only me, but my staff. And for all intents and purposes, we had to shelve the investigation. So public corruption, for me, it's a simple concept, but in terms of investigations and in terms of bringing people to justice, it's a little bit more complex than that. And having said that, Mr. Collins, I actually went through the report you guys produced, and I looked at the 2021 edition for the Caribbean, actually for the Americas, and it says, a region in crisis. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's an apropos description of what's going on. Then I started looking at the countries in the Caribbean, how they're ranked, because as we all know that the closer you get to zero, the more corrupt the country is considered. And then I saw that Barbados was ranked #1, Bahamas #2 in terms of being least corrupt. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, followed by St. Lucia, Dominica, Grenada, Cuba, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Now, I looked at another report and it said that essentially corruption is it's stable in the Caribbean. It's high, but it's stable. And there are only 2 countries who actually made improvements. Guyana was one, and the second one was Trinidad and Tobago. They went down by a point. Problem for me in looking at corruption, not only region-wide, but globally, is that we have conferences, we have forums like these, and we talk until the cows come home. We talk about all kinds of solutions, but they never get implemented for one reason or another. And I dare say most of it, based on my considered experience, is political will. Because you're talking about public corruption, where government officials are involved. And to a large degree, you're asking the government to investigate itself. And as we know, that doesn't work well at all. But then you have NGOs, you have private organizations who have stepped up and they've expressed an interest in conducting these types of investigations, also informing the public, bringing these things to light. Another problem with that is that in some countries, like for example, Jamaica, you have more than one agency that's responsible for investigating public corruption. And there is no collaboration, there's no cooperation, there is no intelligence center where you can funnel all of this information and have analysts look at this and come out with their findings. So we're left with people like Ms. Burton, for example, who's like, the voice, the lonely voice crying out in the wilderness. So the question is, how do we approach this problem region-wide? And I'm happy to see that we have a constellation of stars with us today, people who have the answers. And so I'm hoping that by the time we're done with this program, we will have some fundamental, solid, sound proposal that we can move forward with. So having said that, Mr. Collins, since you were the rep for Transparency International,
before we do that, why don't we just have Deputy Assistant Secretary, I told her she'd be probably going to pass through. She has joined us. The Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Barbara Feinstein, has joined us. She wants to give a readout on what happened with the Summit of Americas. As you know, one of the big themes was democratic governance. And I think that would be a good backdrop against which Jen, we can place our discussion. She will say her remarks, take a few questions, and then leave. And so when we're responding to what we're hearing on the ground, they can also put in place their ideas about where do we go from here as advocates here in America, support what they're doing on the ground. So let me bring on stage and welcome the Persistent Secretary, Barbara Feinstein, who has graciously agreed to join us and give us a readout on the situation, the theme of the Summit of the Americas, democratic governance. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson, and it is a pleasure to be with you all and to be with you and having had the opportunity to engage with you all at the beginning of Caribbean American Heritage Month, and then having this opportunity to loop back with you at the beginning. This was before the Summit of the Americas, and I had put forward all of the things that we're hoping to accomplish, and so glad to have this opportunity to circle back with you and let you know where things stand. I think that the engagement with the Caribbean and Caribbean leaders in particular was definitely one of the high points of the U.S. engagement with leaders at the Summit of the Americas. As I'm sure many of you are tracking, there was an opportunity for Caribbean leaders to engage with the president and the vice president. I think that was the only such engagement at all of the Summit of the Americas in terms of real sustained time between President Biden, Vice President Harris, talking with leaders from the region and really hearing from them what are the pain points, what are their aspirations, what it is that they really want to see come out of a broader relationship, a closer relationship with the United States and the broader hemisphere. So just to give you a few highlights, as you mentioned, democratic governance certainly was one of the themes that was part of the broader framework of the Summit of the Americas, which, as you know, was building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future. So within that context, the US and regional governments worked very hard over the last several months to negotiate hemispheric consensus on political commitments along the areas of democratic governance, health and resilience, climate change and environmental sustainability, the clean energy transition, and digital transformation. So as you know, this was the 9th Summit of the Americas hosted by the United States in Los Angeles, and really the premier and marquee event for our hemisphere, bringing together now North, South, Central America, and the Caribbean at a very critical moment for the region, as we've talked about in terms of COVID-19 and its disproportionate impact on the Latin American Caribbean region. As you know, it's taken the lives of 2.7 million people across the Americas, with the Western Hemisphere representing about 12% of the world's population and yet 40% of global reported deaths. So there was obviously, as intended, a big focus on pandemic recovery, both the economic, social consequences, as well as health consequences in terms of rising poverty, more young people out of work, looking at opportunity. And then, of course, the headwinds coming from or amidst longstanding challenges in the region, including a lack of economic opportunity, persistent inequality, an accelerating climate crisis, violence and insecurity, and endemic corruption, all of which, as we know, are driving people to leave their home countries in record numbers in search of places where they have a better shot at providing for themselves at their loved ones. And so against that backdrop, there was robust discussion around a number of themes, and despite a lot of talk beforehand about who would go, who wouldn't go, I think the broad consensus for those that did go was that this was time well spent, and that coming out of the summit, there was an emerging consensus on our strength as democracies coming together, and knowing that as President Biden said, rather, at the heart, we have everything we need right here in our hemisphere to deliver for our people. So it was a chance to engage with government, of course, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, and young people about where we can do more and where we can do better. So our countries agreed to ambitious commitments in public health and pandemic preparedness, clean energy, climate change adaptation, digital transformation, democratic governance. And so these provide benchmarks for our fellow democracies and the people that we serve to hold us accountable. There were announcements obviously related to Central America and women's empowerment, getting the private sector more engaged broadly and covering all parts of the hemisphere. The United States announced the Digital Agenda for Transformation in the Americas, or DATA initiative, to expand access to technology, as well as an initiative promoting independent media and information integrity, which we know is so critical as we see rising disinformation and that really being weaponized across the world, not just in our hemisphere. As part of our commitment to strengthen democracy, the U.S. Committed additional funding to support over 300 community-led organizations across the Americas that stand on the front lines of human rights advocacy, lifting more people out of poverty and fighting corruption, as well as dedicated efforts on strengthening civil society to promote freedom of expression, counter digital repression, and defend other spaces where citizens engage in their democracies. We also announced the Cities Forward initiative, which is designed to expand economic opportunities by providing technical support and resources to local governments, to mayors in particular, that are on the front lines of many of the core challenges facing the hemisphere. And as a follow-up to the Summit of the Americas, we do plan to host the first ever Cities Summit of the Americas, which will be in Denver, Colorado in April 2023. And that will really offer an opportunity for greater cooperation among city, state, and regional leaders, together with business, youth, and importantly, with civil society. On the economic and prosperity front, the president announced the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity as part of our efforts to promote an equitable recovery in a hemisphere still reeling from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the Americas Partnership, which was announced, will focus on 5 pillars: reinvigorating regional economic institutions and mobilizing investments to update the social contract, resilient supply chains, what's also known as friendshoring or nearshoring, decarbonization, biodiversity, and clean energy jobs, and sustainable and inclusive trade. And of course, the overall objective of this partnership is to build our economies from the bottom up and the middle out by building on the foundation established by our free trade agreements with the region to better address inequality and lack of economic opportunity and equity. And then, of course, as part of that, we also look to reform multilateral institutions such as the Inter-American Development Bank to increase financing for the region's middle-income economies, many of which, of course, are in the Caribbean. And as we know, many of these countries find themselves in this kind of missing middle, where they haven't developed enough to qualify for membership in groups like the G20 or the OECD, and yet they've developed to the point where they no longer qualify for aid from international financial institutions like the World Bank, at least at concessional lending rates. And this is something that we've heard loud and clear as a real concern from partners in the Caribbean community and CARICOM, as well as others. Because the private sector has a central role to play, the US will seek an equity stake in IDB Invest, which is the bank's private sector lending arm, to support the development of, or deployment rather, of private capital and to help direct it where it will have the most impact. We also focused a great deal of time and energy on the issue of the region's transition to clean energy. 5 new countries, including 3 in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Guyana, and Barbados, announced that they plan to join the Renewable Energy for Latin America and Caribbean initiative. And so those 3 countries inclusion brings us to 20 countries, hoping to team up to produce 70% of the hemisphere's electricity through renewable energy by the year 2030. In the area of food security, which of course is an acute concern throughout the region and very much exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the president announced well over $300 million in assistance for the region in food insecurity, and with some of the biggest food producers in the hemisphere committed to working together to address food security in the Americas. Again, with regard to health, which I know has been a focus of your conference this week and attention beyond this week as well. The president announced ambitious initiatives, of course, beyond the 70 million vaccines that have been donated to the hemisphere. We recognize it's also important to work with countries to prepare for future pandemics by supporting health workers and bringing governments and the private sector together to support the manufacturing and production of vaccines right here in the hemisphere. In addition, working with partners, the U.S. committed to training and equipping 500,000 local healthcare workers across the hemisphere over the next 5 years so that more people can get quality care at home in their communities. In addition, and I won't go on for too much longer, there were important declarations with regard to migration and protection, recognizing that this has become a hemispheric issue. And so 21 countries signed on to that declaration, including from the Caribbean, Barbados, Belize, Guyana, Haiti, and Jamaica. And then lastly, I wanted to just focus a bit more on the specific meeting and historic meeting, if I might say, between President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the leaders of CARICOM and the Dominican Republic. And specifically, leaders were given an opportunity to really weigh in with the president, with the vice president, about what the biggest pain points are in their countries. And of course, rising to the top among many others were the issue of the impact of climate change and energy security, food security, and lack of access to low-cost financing. Again, recognizing that many Caribbean countries find themselves in a high-income category for financing, which does not reflect their lived reality, but in terms of World Bank and other international financial institution lending, kind of shuts them out from gaining access to the kind of financing that they need to support their own country's recoveries within a space of very reduced fiscal flexibility. So in this meeting, I would say the president and vice president were very active listeners, as were other members of the US delegation. And coming out of that, there was a commitment to form 3 committees, very high-level committees chaired on each side by the CARICOM countries, by the Dominican Republic, and by the United States at the most senior levels, related to food security, energy/climate change, and financing. And so as we speak, each of our governments are trading proposals at this point in time for what we can do to try to address these needs and provide the kind of relief that the Caribbean is really asking for. Similarly, there was also an announcement or a launch by Vice President Harris of a new US-Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis, 2030. That's also referred to as PAC 2030. And that's focused on facilitating renewable energy infrastructure development, including by increasing access to financing. We recognize that in many of these countries, there is a very strong desire to make a transition to greater renewable energy investments as part of the energy matrix, but that can be very costly. And once again, we get to the issue of financing. So the United States wants to see what we can do together with our partners, together with multilateral financial institutions, to try to make that happen and provide greater flexibility in that space. Of course, there were also discussions around security and concerns around the need to counter small arms trafficking. And in that sense, the US and the Caribbean countries recommitted to building on the longstanding Caribbean Basin Security Initiative through broader engagement in combating trafficking in persons, cybersecurity, cybercrime, and a dedicated effort to look at countering small arms trafficking, specifically US support for national action plans from each of these countries. So that's just to give you a sense of some top lines of what came out of that. But I will just say that coming out of the Summit of the Americas, we find ourselves, the United States, our partners in the Caribbean, and our partners throughout the hemisphere increasingly aligned in our renewed pursuit to confront the common challenges that we face, and as well as a recommitment to our shared strength as democracies and as an example for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DAS Barbara Feinstein. Are you able to take a few questions?
Of course, happy to.
Okay, Mr. Rattigan, as the chair of this session, do you have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
Madam Secretary, welcome and thanks for your appearance and presentation. As you were speaking, by the way, I'm a retired FBI agent and an attorney. As you were speaking, and because I've served in embassies all over the world, I have some sense of how the State Department works.
Yes.
The question I have is this: to the extent that Congress is involved in these projects, how will its present composition, the public acrimony, and the forecasted results of the upcoming election, how will those things affect the US's ability to resolve and to provide assistance to the region?
Thanks for that question. I mean, I will say that in my experience, having worked with the US Congress for many years, I led USAID's Legislative Affairs Department for 6 years. I've worked on Capitol Hill before on the Appropriations Committee, on authorizing committees. I am hard pressed to see another time where we have as many champions for the Caribbean as we do at this point in time in leadership positions on Capitol Hill, whether it is HACFO, we call it HACFO, but House Appropriations Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations, Chairwoman Barbara Lee, of course, Chairman Meeks, Maxine Waters. I mean, the list goes on and on. We had an event just here yesterday at the State Department for congressional staff for Assistant Secretary Nichols to share his observations. And we got, in one time, which is a very busy time, over 25 staffers to come to the State Department and hear specifically about the Caribbean and what can be done to address these challenges. So I am very optimistic about the opportunity to work on a bipartisan basis. And I should say the staffers who came were Democrats and Republicans, eager to look at some of these issues, whether it's nearshoring. Obviously, there are some that animate individuals on one side of the spectrum more than others. But if it's looking at, the presence of China in the region, which animates some, or if it's looking at, nearshoring, friendshoring, if it's looking at, boosting civil society, combating climate change, I think that there are a lot of different dynamics in the region right now, which make it a very interesting and important place for the US Congress to engage.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I believe there's a question from Ms. Burton.
Hi, Madam Secretary. I'm Zara Burton. I'm 18 Degrees North, investigative reporter here in Jamaica. I am curious about something regarding the State Department's support for press freedom initiatives and just press persons operating in the press. Obviously, whether it's, in your own country or in developing nations like ours, there are occasions where journalists sometimes face intimidation. Journalists in Jamaica enjoy a high level of press freedom, but we do have some issues. And I'm just generally wondering, where does the State Department, if at all, help out on this front? And I'm not talking about just in terms of money, I'm talking about more so in terms of where do we go for support when, let us say, there is a feeling of intimidation or that kind of thing?
Thanks for the question. I will say that is a very high priority for the State Department, is promoting press freedom globally. It's certainly something that when I travel, a key theme that I mention as much as I have the opportunity to do it. And when there are issues, I view it as my role to spotlight those, to where appropriate, meet with journalists and demonstrate the US's support for press freedom and transparency in countries. I will also say that coming out of the Democracy Summit, which you may have been tracking perhaps about 6 months ago, I'm forgetting the time, maybe even a year ago at this point in time, there was an announcement of enhanced commitments to press freedom, including the creation by USAID of an anti-defamation fund. The idea being that if, to the extent that journalists are often silenced through threats of lawsuits and those sorts of things, and then they cannot fight back, how can the United States, through the provision of support to journalists, help to kind of fight back against that dynamic, if for no other reason than to serve as a deterrent to allow journalists to go ahead and do their very important work. And I should note that USAID's administrator is herself, Samantha Power, a former journalist, so is very passionate about the issue of press freedom.
And this fund is a global fund, or is it specific to the Caribbean? I just want to make sure. And where is it? How do you apply? Oh, and how?
It is a global fund. So I know that it was announced. I'd have to check to see what the status of it is right now. But at that Democracy Summit, there was the announcement that the U.S. intended to launch this fund for anti-defamation and to support journalists globally.
Madam Secretary, one quick question. This panel is gathered here to discuss corruption because it's a priority for the Caribbean. In fact, it's a global priority. I'm just curious, where does your department stand on providing assistance to the Caribbean regarding this issue?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, I think that we address corruption as the United States government in a variety of different ways. Obviously, diplomatically, as far as sending high-level messages to host country governments of concern when we see evidence of corruption. We, note the impact of that on private sector investment, for example. I meet frequently with U.S. private sector companies that will convey their reticence to engage in certain countries, whether it's in the Caribbean or elsewhere in the region or elsewhere in the world, because of the corruption that they see, because that they don't see a level playing field and ability to, have an open and transparent tender process, for example, to be able to compete on an open playing field. The United States government obviously provides support for civil society to be able to advocate for greater transparency, to advocate for their rights and to spotlight corruption. We also support in many different countries independent media and will provide training in independent journalism and oversight and that sort of thing, so that, again, they can play the fundamental role that they should in any free and open society to spotlight corruption whenever and wherever they see it.
Thank you,
and
Madam.
I should also say one other piece of it is that the U.S. government also provides technical support to countries in the procurement process if there is a desire, and these are technical advisors, to take a look at bid documents and spotlight whether there are kind of predatory clauses or other sorts of things that would facilitate corruption. So that kind of technical assistance to government ministries to facilitate more rigorous and open and transparent procurement processes for large infrastructure, or even just at the local level for accounting and budgets.
I just want to say, I know the DS has to leave at 4:45. I know Herb had a question, and so I give him the privilege of the last question because he's the organizer of this day. But I just want to say that we are concerned that moving forward, and we'll obviously come back to you when this event is over, to have a conversation about the role of civil society and watchdog organizations, such as what we are trying to establish. Herb Nelson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. Secretary Feinstein, about 4 years ago, you had a new HSI special agent in charge assigned to Jamaica. And one of the things you and I spoke about was trying to look at return on investment. In other words, US funds that flowed into Jamaica, how was it utilized? Where was the process? And is there a way to measure it? And he got a lot of grief, I can tell you. In the end, he was totally frustrated with the system. What measurements, what yardsticks do you have, or does Department of State have for measuring each and every fund that's granted to Jamaica for whatever the process is? We would like to know, simply because it would give us the option of measuring it ourselves.
Of course, thank you. It's an excellent question. I don't have the specifics on HSI or the individual. I wasn't engaged in this account 4 years ago, but happy to follow up with you separately on that. I will say, broadly speaking, with our assistance programs, there is a desire to, since they are taxpayer funded, by the U.S. taxpayer, a desire to maximize the amount of rigor and transparency in those to ensure that that is money well spent. And certainly for the host country, in this case for Jamaica, but it's true everywhere, we want to make sure that these are programs that are beneficial also to the host country. Now, that may not be the government, it may be civil society, it may be the private sector, it may be others. But certainly the programs that are instituted ought to be something that is making a difference, and certainly is part of a broader system, and that there is a desire to continue that on the part of the host country. And again, defining that broadly, not just government, but broader civil society. In this administration, I think you will have seen on the foreign assistance side, and again, this leadership being provided by Samantha Power at the U.S. Agency for International Development, a desire to look holistically at assistance to make sure that it is more locally led, so that it is not the United States just kind of coming in and saying, we think you should do X, and we want to just bring this program. And I think usually the reaction to that is, okay, fine, if you'd like to do that, that's acceptable, but it's not really helping us with what it is that we need. And so ensuring that when programs are designed, they are designed with host country buy-in, with host country leadership, and ideally, where possible, implemented by host country actors, so that there is a greater likelihood that they will actually be sustained in the future. I mean, I think we've all seen programs that you can look at the metrics that were established in the program documents. It achieved XYZ, but at the end of the day, it was not embedded in the system. There was no buy-in from the host country government to continue it. So therefore, as soon as the implementing partner left, the program ended and nothing continued. And in my book, that is not a success. It may have achieved the metrics, but if it didn't actually move the needle, if it wasn't actually sustainable, then it was not a good project. And so I think that there is very much a culture shift, which is, has been a long time coming, to say we need to make sure that these are really driven by host countries, by their publics, and accountable in that respect as well.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Deputy Assistant Secretary Barbara Feinstein, for dropping by at the end of your long week. We know it's a labor of love for you to do this. It was really a last minute yesterday. Let's touch base. Do you want me to come? I don't want it coming. And so, I'm really happy that she sees herself as being a true ally of the diaspora. And I'm really grateful for that. It signals that we're going to hopefully be able to make a dent as transnational beings in our Caribbean life in the region and our Caribbean life here in America. Thank you again for being here. And we'll be sure to report.
I would just say it's a real privilege and opportunity, and I always learn from these sessions. So I really appreciate the opportunity for engagement and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. So with that, Attorney Wilfred Rattigan, I'll turn back the floor to you to continue. So guys, it's 4:50. We're going to go to 6 o'clock because we do want this discussion to be pretty robust. We don't want to feel rushed. That's why we put at the end of the day. We did not want people to feel curtailed. It's important that we leave here with a sense of where it is we want to go. We're happy we have people on the ground. Sheridan, I know you're in Georgia right now, but your organization is to operate on the ground in the Eastern Caribbean region. Zara represents a very important stakeholder group. The media, Attorney Bagan is another stakeholder group. And many of the speakers who are still here from previous panels represent other stakeholder groups. What we really want to do is ensure when we leave here in our document, or advocacy document, there's some agreement about those who may want to participate in scripting what we will put forward, so that our advocacy can really result in an initiative that engages civil society and the media in the requisite institutional supports that need to be in place. We cannot rely on the government to take this forward. Indeed, we are the government. We are the people, are the government, because it's democracy by the people and for the people. So with that, Attorney Rattigan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. I mean, the brief discussion we had with Madam Secretary was an eye-opener, because I think she's given us a roadmap, or at least an avenue as to how to deal with this problem in the Caribbean. Now, having said that, let's get to Mr. Collins, right, from Transparency International. Could you just briefly just tell us, your views, where you stand, your organization's view on the transparency and the eradication of corruption in the Caribbean?
Well, that's a broad question, and
give us a Reader's Digest. And then so that you have enough time to come back. Yeah.
The Reader's Digest. The Reader's Digest is, I noticed Representative Feinstein mentioned what was discussed at the Summit of the Americas. Transparency International was represented there, and we have a meeting scheduled at which they will debrief us. That is maybe tomorrow or so. But what I can tell you, we also had a movement summit that is independent of that. So you had the Summit of the Americas, and we had the TI, Transparency International Movement Summit, which just finished yesterday. And it was a 4-day series of presentations and discussions. And the prognosis, the diagnosis, the picture of what is happening in the world, not just the Caribbean, is not a nice one. It is one in which civic space is being reduced worldwide, in which the operatives in corruption are finding creative ways to ply their trade. And it is one in which the world is becoming more and more dangerous for people like our journalist, Zara Burton there. And so that is the reality of what we are confronting. I hope that is good for a Reader's Digest thumbnail. Not hearing you, not hearing you.
Sorry. One quick question. Guyana went up or improved its position on the corruption list. To what do you attribute that?
Well, let me tell you about that improvement. I don't know whether you have to get a context for that. It is an improvement that wasn't much of an improvement, because let me refer you. Let me read the figures for you. The figures are, what we are talking about for Guyana is 2019, 40, 2020, 41, 2021, 39. So there was indeed a drop by 2 points. And I can tell you that that has been the source of quite a topical issue from an agency called Vice News that has been embroiled with our vice president, nonetheless, with regard to an accusation of corruption involving some Chinese representatives in Guyana. You can see it in the press, and it's been kind of simmering for some weeks now. Now, what's the real truth of that? Our Transparency International identified Guyana for kind of encouragement in that there was no real, because those 2 points were not statistically significant. So that what Transparency International said is that if you look from 2012 to 2021, you would notice that from 2012 it was 28. And so there's been an improvement. And over the 3 years, it's been kind of static, notwithstanding the 2-year drop. In other words, from a statistical point of view, all 3 years are the same. But the press, Vice News, made hay with that and accused the current government of having, since they came into power, it has dropped 2 years. 2 points, how do you explain that? So that has been a source of controversy. Nonetheless, to answer your question directly, there has been improvement, but if you look at 2012, but there's been constancy. We are still in the low performing range, that is 40.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think that's just about most of the Caribbean when I'm looking at the numbers here. Having said that, Mr. Gregoire.
Yes, yes, Brother Radigan. I was very impressed with the contribution made by Secretary Feinstein. And a few areas caught my mind, really caught my attention. And let me just point out 3 of them. The first one is that because I own a radio station in Dominica, which most people would tell you is probably the only independent radio station on the island. It's a small island, as you know, about 4 or 5 radio stations there, but all the others are controlled by the government. So we are the turn two radio station for anybody in the opposition, any independent organization that want to be able to express freely. They're really not given that kind of time on the state radio or the other radio station. So we're very interested in following up on that, because it is very important for us, because what is happening, you may have, well, our brother Collins is talking about what's going on in the region. And we can see, I mean, I'm sure he has some history of Dominica, where we are now in search of $4.2 billion, which is unaccounted for in the treasury from our CBI program. We're looking for that. And the other thing is that we know that we have appointed so many diplomats who have ended up in jail. We never knew that, we can't even pronounce their names. And many of them have ended up in jail. And so we wonder, how did these people become diplomats? You know, like Maduke, who was a lady from Nigeria. A country is looking for some $20 billion or something like that. There's another NG Lapsang, the chap, you know, so there's so much of that. And so, and we're very concerned about the corruption, but we're concerned really about creating good governance. And so all of the, on all radio station, you'll find all the groups like, although we are registered in the state of Georgia, we do have our affiliations on the ground, like the Concerned Citizens Movement, National Joint Action Movement, that kind of thing. So we are very interested in following up on some of what came out of the Summit of Americas, because for us, that would be very critical. And I really would like to follow up with you, Brother Collins, as well, for Transparency International, because that is an area where we have some concerns in our own country. And if you follow what's going on there, I mean, there's so much. We have an Integrity in Public Office Commission that has not met for 5 years. The last time they met and they tried to ask the Prime Minister of the country to give them an accounting, which he's supposed to do by law, he dissolved the committee and reduced it to 3 people from 7. And these 3 have not met here for a few years. So you can see the kinds of issues that we have in terms of transparency. Our elections, we don't consider to be free and fair. We have a lot of concerns about that. And so the OAS and the CARICOM and a number of these agencies that have come to oversee the elections. And so we really, in fact, they've engaged Sir Dennis Byron to do a study, but we're not sure where that report is and what's going to happen to it. So we're concerned about free and fair elections as well. So you can see there now, because Dominica prides itself as a nature island in the Caribbean, we're concerned about looking after the rivers and looking after the, you know, the environment. We do have the opportunity for renewable energy. We have geothermal, but we've spent over $100 million and not one light bulb has been lit from that. So you can see we have some concerns about where's all that money going to. So some of those things I noted with interest that the secretary indicated that some of those issues were dealt with and there's provisions for them, for, you know, collaboration there from the Summit in America. So we're very interested in pursuing that. All right, so, and of course, this clean energy thing, we're very, very interested because that is what Dominica is. It's mostly agriculture, and we consider ourselves ecotourism and all of that. So it's important for us to preserve the rivers and, you know, and preserve all our forests. In fact, we now have our Mount Wabito National Park is designated by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, but we see incursions being made into that, you know, so we want to try to help to preserve that as well. So yes, brother, so these are some of the issues I picked out from what Secretary Feinstein raised. There are several others, but to me, those we would like to be able to get some follow-up on, and if whatever assistance we can get to thread the needle to pursue some of those, we'll be happy with that. And essentially, we want to, this is my first time attending this webinar, thanks to Dr. Clare. And we would like to maintain relations with everyone on this panel, because I mean, I can see already that there's substance here. And so we hope we can maintain some kind of a connection so you can help us thread the needle as we go along in our young organization. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. Staying on the same track with media, Ms. Burton, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi again, everybody. I would like to say a couple of things in addition to what I'm just seeing a message here from Cara, and I think this is relevant, about the program that would help journalists being implemented for 2023, the program that the department, the Assistant Secretary, State Department Secretary just spoke about. And I think it's not going to be up until 2023, but in the meantime, there are things that I believe that the diaspora can help with in terms of investigative journalism. And the chief thing for me would be in terms of commentating. I know, for instance, Mr. Rattigan, he has lent his thoughts to a particular story, which maybe I didn't publish his thoughts, but that particular story. But I just want to say that I was very grateful for the fact that somebody chose to speak with me about a particular story I was working on. As far as voices and commentators go, I find that there are a lot of times, oftentimes within the Caribbean, especially among even some of the smaller islands, where some of us, because we have to live here, are very tentative to speak to journalists about what we think regarding certain matters of corruption. And because we're so tentative, invariably, the persons that are either fingered, so for instance, I don't know if it was Frederick, you just mentioned about the Vice Media Group that talked about this corruption issue. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so that's international media. Where are we in the local media able to get the kind of voices that we need? And I think that the diaspora is where we can look. However, I find that sometimes diaspora voices, even though they're not here and they're more protected by distance, they also shy away. And so I was very grateful for Mr. Rattigan recently to speak with me about an issue that I was working on. I believe that we in the well, when I said we in the diaspora, I used to live abroad, but I'm not in the diaspora that much. Well, I'm not in the diaspora anymore, but I believe that some of the persons maybe that are logged on here, when they give their viewpoints, I think they need to be more, I guess, forthright. They need to be more willing, and they need to stand in the authority that they have if they're contacted when it comes to issues of corruption. Okay, so that's one of the things I think we need, especially from the diaspora, because as I said, they have the protection of distance. The other thing I would say is, again, from a standpoint of you know having more protection with distance, is the issue of writers. So you'll find from time to time that there are individuals who are here in Jamaica that may have an interest in investigative reporting, but shy away from doing it because they have to live here. I believe that if we had a more robust set of contributors to writing or reporting and investigative reporting, whether it's lawyers who are trained to look for details or journalists who have that kind of background, that would be willing to work on even my platform, which is 18degreesnorthtv.substack.com or 18dn.substack.com. I think it would be helpful to have more writers who are bolder to contribute. I can tell you that some of the more bold people that I've interacted with have not been here, but are very, very interested in what happens in Jamaica. And so I would love, for instance, for more writers or potential writers, journalists that are interested in digging deep and really wanting to stamp out corruption, that are not necessarily, well, are not influenced, not necessarily, but not influenced by any kind of political faction, just want to be fair and thorough about what it is that they want to bring to the table. I think we could definitely use help where that is concerned. For those of you who are on this platform, I encourage you to sign up at 18degreesnorthtv.substack.com. You can become a free subscriber. It's only paid if you really want to get the full articles, but it's free if you want to just get the summary of what is happening in terms of the investigations that I do. So that is my take on it in terms of the press freedom. As you know, our ranking, you would call it deteriorated. Our Press Association of Jamaica president would say it's a matter that the calculation was just different this year compared to previous years. But as one person writing recently in a paper here in Jamaica, I believe it was the Sunday Observer, said, he didn't necessarily disagree or didn't agree with the PAJ president on that score. And I would say to you that I'm a bit, even though we still enjoy many freedoms here in Jamaica compared to maybe a China and compared to maybe a Cuba, and we have a lot to celebrate, I'm a bit concerned about certain experiences that I've had personally, where my work has been met with not just opposition, because opposition you can deal with, but certain what you feel are, despite if it's true or not, I'm just saying how I feel as an individual practitioner here in Jamaica, are sometimes, you know, from time to time veiled threats when you get these messages on social media. And so you get a bit concerned. And I think that we're not talking about that as a group, meaning the Press Association of Jamaica. I think we're not talking about that. Some of the psychological trauma that comes with reporting and publishing, and the kind of knots you feel in your stomach when you actually publish, and what's going to happen. You know, what is social media going to rip you apart? And, you know, the kind of ripping apart that could come. It is hard to deal with. And that's why I'm saying, when I asked the question of the secretary, or the assistant secretary a bit earlier, it was about also, not just, as I said, I mean, it's great to hear about the defamation fund that may be helpful down the road. As I said, 2023, some time away, but just the psychological support that journalists need. It's incredible. It's a very, very hard job. And increasingly, some persons who have shared information with me have said that they are, you know, one person told me in recent times this year that they backed off of a story, at least for now, because somebody had, like, a car had followed them or that kind of thing. I know I have experienced a situation where I got a call, and that particular person had said that, you know, they were almost like being propositioned to surveil me to some extent. So these are the challenges, and they're rough challenges. I mean, they're real, but I think in terms of supporting investigative journalism, what we need is more support in terms of how to deal with this. We need more support in terms of certainly financial support for the kind of journalism that we do. But as I said, for me, from the diaspora, it's the writers that I need also commentators, people who are expert in what they do and willing to speak, to offer that kind of expert commentating.
Let me just say, Ms. Burton, that it's a requirement of an FBI agent to develop, maintain, and work with sources. Sources who are providing valuable information. Because when you get your file review after every 90 days, one of the things the supervisor is going to look at is to look to see how many sources you've developed and the type of information that they're providing. If they're not providing good information, you're required to close them. Now, having said that, the other thing to it is that the FBI is renowned for not only developing sources, but protecting sources and protecting information. By no means am I making a comparison to you and the FBI. But the question I'm asking you is, do you get the sense that, you know, and you mentioned that somebody withdrew a story. Do you get the sense that people are afraid that because you're not a law enforcement entity, that you're not in a position to protect them or protect the information?
There's that too. There's that too, where one story I remember, and I'm not remembering who exactly this was, but the person said something to the effect of, you know, if I give you the information, can you guarantee my safety? In other words, they were kind of leaning toward, can you fly me out of Jamaica if necessary? I feel as if, not right this second, not this year, but several years ago, that was a piece of conversation that came up. And so I do think, as I said to you before, you know, and I think even in another jurisdiction where this is in the Caribbean, no, not necessarily Jamaica. I feel like I remember a story about an investigative journalist who had to kind of go away for a while, you know what I mean, until things kind of calmed down and then came back. So it's a real situation. We need to stand up a regional initiative. This is from Dr. Claire Nelson. I don't know if she wants to expand on what she exactly means, but it would be good to hear that. I don't know where we go from there, but that is a real concern, as you're pointing out, our ability or lack thereof to protect sources by flying them out and that kind of thing, which is why, as I said, with the State Department, when the Assistant Deputy Secretary,
We know who you're talking. We know who you're talking.
yeah, when she was on a moment ago, right? Barbara Feinstein. It was interesting to hear her speak, but I have to be honest, I had more questions for her regarding what kind of protections could be you know, that we could avail ourselves of as journalists to protect sources, as you point out, but also to protect ourselves.
Let me just turn to Sheridan, because since he's involved in the media as well. I know
Excuse
you're
me, sorry. I think Mr. Collins had said he had to leave. Just want to make sure he has this opportunity to say whether he has to go.
Mr. Collins, you're planning to leave us soon, sir?
Yes, in fact, I had communicated that as a condition of my being on the program, that I had to leave for another meeting.
All right, well, let me throw something at you. Let me throw something at you before you go. There's an organization called the Commonwealth Caribbean Association of Integrity Commissions and Anti-Corruption. Are you familiar with that organization?
Not at all. In fact,
go ahead.
I heard the brother from Dominica speak about certain things not happening, and perhaps suggesting that because we exist in Guyana, things might be different and we might be able to show some light and lead the way. I am afraid that we have integrity commissions and we have had it for decades, and all the government does is to pay lip service to that kind of thing. The office, there was some positive development a few mornings ago, but what tends to happen is that the office is understaffed so that they cannot come to grips with the kind of work that they have to do. But that is the best one we have, apart from the court. But in Guyana, I can tell you that every crevice of government reeks of corruption. And we have a situation where the great opportunity for corruption to manifest itself, which is the procurement, or as you said, you are from the American system, you call it government contracts. And that is where it festers. And all the theory from Lee Kuan Yew and those fellows tell you that if you don't have campaign financing, and we don't, then the parties will look to be funded by sources that will have to be repaid when they get into power. And when they get into power, they will use the procurement system to reward those people. Guyana looks very much like that. And so we would take a long time, but that's the picture. And in terms of, you said the whole point of this exercise is that you must come away with a working approach to solving problems. And so let me tell you that when I listened to Representative Feinstein just now, what was very clear to me, that the narrative that she was giving is not the narrative that we experience. Because what we experience in Guyana is that there is a contract for a petroleum contract between the driving company, which is Exxon, and the government of Guyana, and which of course is in the interest of the United States to support. That contract is everything but fair to the people and government of Guyana. And so I don't know that what Representative Feinstein said, it sounds nice, but we would prefer to fund ourselves. If we can get fair treatment from the companies, the multinationals that we deal with, Guyana would not only be able to not need to rely on financing from the United States or anybody else, but we can be able to help the Caribbean and the CARICOM region. At the rate we're going, we wouldn't be able to help ourselves. And it will take a long time for us to explain that, but there's a summary of it in a column that was written by one of our fighters, who happens to be an environmentalist. We at TIGI are not environmentalists. We would like to see the oil continue for a while, at least. They think it should stop. But if you look at the column from the diaspora, which I hope to put a link in before I leave, that summarizes what she said and what is her position. That as far as she's concerned, when you put the history of petroleum exploration in third world countries, Guyana will not get rich from petroleum. In fact, it will get a lot of negatives from the petroleum. And that summarizes our situation at the moment.
Well, let me ask you this. Has anyone in your organization explored the possibility of, or the utility of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act?
The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, you're speaking about the US Act?
Correct, because you have a US corporation involved, Exxon, right?
Well, that is an interesting point that you have just made. I have not learned of anybody even thinking about reaching there. What I do know is that one of the journalists, speaking about Ms. Morton's profession, Glenn Lull, the owner of Kaiture News, he has taken the government to court, the contract to court, and not just for a specific aspect of the contract, which is a contract that frees Exxon from paying taxes. Exxon pays 0 tax on its income in Guyana. And it's given a certificate as if it paid taxes to take to the Americans, to the American government. And he has challenged that in court, so that the people in Guyana are taking action as much as we can. And that is the most prominent of them all. But in terms of what you said to her, we have had the British 2010, the Anti-Bribery Act, the British Act explained to us. The British Council or High Commission had all the who's who, the judges, the magistrates, the corruption, anti-corruption, the accountants. That was in 2013 or thereabouts, and explained it to us and said, if anybody commits a crime in terms of bribery or so in another jurisdiction, and they're British, you have to watch out, because the court can get you. So up came the GlaxoSmithKline bribery scandal in China. That's a British company. And so we were looking to see if they would take action. That is since 2015. They took no action. And they never said why. But what we suspect is that if they don't bribe, the French will. So that's why I say that to say, I don't know that anybody would want to resort to the American law, extraterritorial act, given our experience with the British one.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it does work. I've seen it work. I've conducted investigations using that act. Of course, there has to be a PR component to it as well, because like you said, otherwise it won't see the light of day. It will get buried with files elsewhere. But once you get certain agencies involved and there's a PR campaign, again, it's my considered experience that you do get results from it. So maybe it's one of those things that you should consider.
You bear it in mind. That's a very good idea.
I do think what I would like to suggest is that we come back to this. I know you have to go, but this issue of lawsuits is very important. I think that certain terms of the oil and gas company, my big concern is the agreement or the environmental protection agreement. I would certainly like to be able to talk to you guys more about it to see how is the Caribbean Sea protected in the event of a spill. And I would love to see members of Guyana and other islands who represent children or somebody do a lawsuit, because at the end of the day, our future health of the seas is extinct. We have to use whatever we have. And but so there are people on the ground who are willing to file lawsuits. I'm saying we, the diaspora, must form a system around them the way they do in the United States, so they're not standing by themselves as one sole voice.
Absolutely.
But can I also say that too, just to that point, how in this instance, Mr. Collins, is that lawsuit being funded? Because Dr. Dr. Nelson, you're bringing up a point. There are lots of different suits that should probably be filed in the Caribbean, but nobody wants to fund these suits that need to be filed, even though there's a willingness to file these suits and to challenge a lot of the system. So you said tell us, how is it being funded as, from what you know of that media host that's suing in Guyana?
Well, to the best of my knowledge and belief, it is self-funded, and it is funded from volunteers who want to see that matter sorted out in favor of the Guyanese public.
One of the things you should also explore is the availability of the whistleblower statute, because there's certain provisions to it that you can have the Department of Justice stand in your stead.
Sorry, whose whistleblower statute? The American whistleblower statute or ours?
No, the American whistleblower statute coming under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Because one of the things that they also do is that if they actually compensate some whistleblowers, so you get a percentage. If you blow the whistle and they conduct the investigation, then they'll either go to trial or they'll force a settlement, and then the whistleblower gets a percentage. I mean, Herb knows about this. He can correct me if I'm on the right track.
Well, before it had to take somebody in your capacity who was working with the FBI to give us that kind of advice, because we have been searching wherever we can to get help in terms of the potential for litigation and making litigation. And what we are finding is that you can't find a lawyer in Guyana who is willing to help to do that. Everybody seems to want to be waiting to have some of the money from Exxon's table. And I understand that we understand that this is what a lot of these big companies do when they go into small countries. They make sure that they spread around some of the joy so that nobody wants to really take them on. So it had to take somebody like you to say what you said. That's we are going to make a note.
And that is the essence of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's when an American government starts to bribe foreign officials to get a contract.
Interesting.
That's the essence of it. And then that action also is not an action brought by private individuals. That action is brought by the Department of Justice. So you don't even have to pay for legal fees for that action.
One of the things, Mr. Collins, there's a particular lawsuit called NCAHM, which is what the special agent is alluding to. And under NCAHM rules, you are entitled to a certain percentage of the money that the U.S. government recovers. And nobody wants to advertise it because it is such a threat. QUITAM.
Okay.
All right. And if you look it up, it goes hand in hand with the whistleblower rules.
Well, I do think I'd like to say that some of the things we would like to see come out of this conversation. Number one, is there actually a whistleblower act in the region? Are the court is there a way we can get a transparency and a national group in Dominica and the other groups on the ground?
We have whistleblower legislation in Jamaica, but it doesn't support or it doesn't protect whistleblowers who report to journalists, only to if they report to the Integrity Commission or a MOCA or stuff like that.
It doesn't report them.
That's a joke.
Right.
It doesn't report them, Zara, even when they go to the Integrity Commission. And I'll tell you this, I'll share this with you. I have a client who actually went and filed under the whistleblower statute, and Herb Nelson is very familiar with this case. And he filed today, and the following day, the people he filed against, they called him up and said, "Look, we know, we heard." In fact, they produced the document. So much for
I guess it's theory.
There's no confidentiality in most cases. And
that's what I'm saying. So knowing that and knowing who is at the table, I'm saying we need to go beyond this conversation and create some kind of working group to sit around and design a specific initiative to deal with this, because it's only going to get worse in an AI-enabled world, right?
Listen,
all of this ties together.
Could I be, because I'm gonna run now. I have heard so much that tells me that we really need to follow up I see Attorney Mr. Bagon. I don't know if he looks like if he would have been asking some great questions. So I guess we have to carry this thing out a little more, but I will mention something with Ms. Borton. Ms. Borton, we had a certain government officer sending the police to the editor of one of our prominent newspapers, Mr. Anand Prasad, accusing him of stealing a document which he got from the registrar of deeds with regard to a company, which exposed who was really behind the beneficial owner of a company. That has happened within the last week in Guyana. So we need collaboration in the Caribbean. It is one thing we can take away from here. There is a lot at risk. What you said about the kind of experience you've had in Jamaica, my colleague in Trinidad can tell you about experiences he has had. Like he had to take his family and go and cool it somewhere else for a while, several years ago. Civil society and the society is at risk in the Caribbean. And unless people understand that and are prepared to speak out and to recognize what is the threat, we are in trouble. So I would like to leave that with this group, and I'm very happy for the advice that you have. Thank you for the opportunity. But I got to go.
Nice to meet you,
Very
Mr.
welcome.
Collins.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
sir.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
You know, Mr. Vagan, you've been sitting there patiently, and I remember having a discussion with you last year, and you know, we consider you part of this panel, even though I don't see your name on it, but it doesn't matter. What are your views on what you've heard so far?
Well, coming from Trinidad, we have a procurement bill. My resume actually went up to sit in the procurement board, but they chose somebody else, a young senator, and I thought I missed one of the best opportunities of my life, you know, because all the contracts in the country go through the procurement board. Our procurement legislation was never proclaimed, so they're paying salaries for a board to not do anything and not overlook any contracts. That's the basic gist of it. And the government is dragging its feet. So we have no proper public procurement for like 5 years, 6 years now. And throughout the region, we have similar problems. One of these islands, the premier was arrested recently for trying to traffic drugs into America. I can't remember which one it was. So we do have British BVI. So it is a rampant problem, and we do need probably if there was some sort of institute where the U.S. law enforcement in the embassy, well, probably not in the embassy, because that would cause the government to discriminate against the embassy. But if there was an anonymous online system, where, as in Guyana's case, if there was evidence that Exxon bribed politicians, that should be given over to the FBI. And
I think we need to align ourselves to the other NGOs in America who have a lot of, let's say, I don't know who's funding them either, but other NGOs in America that are like radical NGOs in this space. Because if we just go by this government stuff, it's not gonna be pretty, right? It's better if whatever alliance we create has two legs. It have, let's say, the front leg, which is like doing all the whistleblower law things, justice thing, etc., etc. And then you have your street leg, that is, you know, the people who go out and march and stand up in front of the oil tanks, etc. You have to have another piece of your puzzle that attaches yourself to that group, because otherwise, just like when you had this civil rights movement, you had the radical side and then the quote unquote the peaceful marching side. I don't see any way we're going to prevent this sort of the future we are fearing from occurring if we don't adopt a two-legged approach. We cannot put all our hands in the basket and say, if we just, you know, sit down and play nice. I'm really proud of those people who have actually filed lawsuits already. And I think one of the first things we have to think about is, and the journalist, I hope she can come back on, she dropped off. But I do hope that we can find a way to support people like Mr. Collins, people like her, and the other people who already filed lawsuits, convene them, craft something with their input to see how best to give them some room to run and hide if necessary.
You know, Mr. Bagan, and by the way, Dr. Nelson, I couldn't agree with you more in the sense that the more tools you have in the toolbox, the better it's going to be. You have to have not only a plan A, but a plan B and maybe a C as well in dealing with corruption. But Mr. Bagan, I'm looking at a report here dated January of this year, and one of our expected panelists, Mr. Dion Abdul, he made a statement. In fact, he's the, I don't know if he still is, but he was the chairman of the Transparency Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. And he made a statement that more must be done to improve Trinidad and Tobago's ranking, particularly in operation, I can't say it, operation, to increase legislation and introduce additional legislation to reduce corruption. And he also mentioned that there's a need to reintroduce the whistleblower legislation to protect our public. Now, this is 2022. What happened before this?
Well, usually the government keeps since about 2010 to 2015, they promised campaign finance legislation, whistleblower protection, transparency. All governments promise these things, and it never happens. And I can see on both sides of the political aisle in Trinidad are pretty corrupt. The police service is pretty bad as well. There was a report called the Stanley John Report, and a retired judge stated that so to get a gun in Trinidad, you need to apply for a firearms license. Normally that takes 3 to 5 years unless you pay a bribe of about $5,000 to $10,000 US. So a judge wrote a report that the entire system of obtaining firearms licenses in Trinidad is a well-oiled machine for corruption. So we've had dozens of police commissioners sitting in office letting that slide. So a lot of people are, the inaction to stop the corruption speaks some volumes. They have no evidence against who did what, but the fact that this has been a state of affairs, police service is questionable, politicians are questionable. It's yes, that's the state of Trinidad.
Let me just take a quick break here and defer to Dr. Nelson. I think she wants to play a message from Congresswoman Waters. Dr. Nelson?
Sound.
We have some technical difficulties there. Are we still gonna?
Institute of Caribbean Studies for that introduction and for all her work this year and every year to organize the Institute's legislative weeks. As the chair of the House Financial Services Committee and the co-chair of the Congressional Caribbean Caucus, I care deeply about the issues affecting Caribbean Americans and the nations and people of the Caribbean region. I'm especially eager to speak with you this year, not simply because it's the 24th year of your ICS Legislative Week, and congratulations to Dr. Nelson on that achievement. Rather, I am pleased to speak with you because I have recently returned from leading a congressional delegation to the Caribbean. While in Bridgetown, Barbados, our group of members joined nearly a dozen heads of state, industry, international financial institutions, and others to discuss concrete actions to improve financial access for the nations, businesses, and citizens of the region. At our full-day roundtable, an event that I co-hosted with Barbadian Prime Minister Mia Amor Bartley, we looked at how we can collaborate to reverse the trend of a lack of banking services, especially the cross-border correspondent banking services that are the backbone of the tourism trade and remittances that fuel the region's economic growth and stability. Back home in Washington, we're working directly with participants to move those action items from concept to reality. And for our part, The House Financial Services Committee will host a hearing in September on the issue of de-risking, exploring possible legislative and policy steps for the United States Congress and the United States government agencies and our industry. In addition to the financial access issues, our delegation met with officials to discuss climate change concerns and debt challenges. Climate change is having a profound and tragic impact on the Caribbean region. The hurricane season starts early and lasts longer last year. Major hurricanes are becoming more frequent and more catastrophic. Preparing for hurricane season is costly, yet despite the best preparations, some hurricanes are inevitably severe, deadly, and economically devastating. In addition to the lives lost, these hurricanes destroy homes and businesses and cause millions in damages. Typically, disaster recovery assistance from international financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank is provided in the form of loans, which must be paid back over many years. To make matters worse, most Caribbean nations are considered middle-income countries. This means that they must pay high interest rates for loans even after a catastrophic natural disaster. Caribbean officials have informed me that a significant portion of their international debts are caused by hurricanes. We need to rethink our approach to disaster recovery for countries that are suffering from the most severe impacts of climate change, forcing small island nations to take out a long-term loan to recover from a major hurricane. Makes no sense when there is another hurricane just around the corner. Climate change is a global problem. It was not caused by the nations of the Caribbean, and these small island nations should not have to bear the financial costs of a global climate crisis that they did not cause. As the chair of the Financial Services Committee, I will be looking at this issue closely in the future. The nations of the Caribbean are our neighbors and our allies. The issues that affect them affect us. That is why I appreciate your interest in U.S.-Caribbean relations, and I so look forward to continuing our efforts to solve the challenges we face together. And thank you so very much. I always look forward to your being here every year, and I enjoy the opportunity to be kept up to date on what is happening with our Caribbean nations and what we can do to be more helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, so think about that in terms of financial services. Would any of you have any comments on a follow the money strategy?
Herb?
When you're following money, like in I know we have a case right now where we want to follow the money, but sometimes it's going to involve really deep dives. That means you have to go to your connections, and then they have to reach out to somebody inside the financial institution. And then once you have the information you need, you pay good money for it, but then you have to lay that information out and see if there's anything prosecutable about it. Sometimes we can verify that there's something amiss and that the companies play games and they lie. And then you have to back them in a corner to force them to admit. But you need the proof. An investigator like Zara, if we had strong proof on particular cases, and we handed it to her and we said, look, go for it. You go ahead and back them in a corner. What we fear is for her. Because if these guys have their backs against the wall and they figure they're going to go down, you know, if they take Zara out, then, you know, that's no good. And some of these people, they have police that they use as pawns in their games. And they move, and the police earlier Will, there was a comment that the police was used in a certain way to intimidate and to charge somebody. Does it sound familiar? It's almost like the police commissioners meeting last week, or whenever they do meet, they come up with these tactics to support companies and multinational corporations, right? They're gonna come in and charge you with somebody. Now, you have police officers doing these charges, and they, like if it's cybersecurity, they don't even have that portfolio. There's a different unit that has that portfolio. So that's your first red flag. Then you have to dive in deeper to see who are these people. And then you may have to do some accounting checks of their accounts to see if they have unexplained affluence in any way. So it gets really deep clear that the way you have to push back with this kind of stuff. And we do have folks out there that can do it, but once you engage them, the challenge is you're gonna have a lot of ammunition. And this is what our counterpart who passed away back in 2020, we gave him a lot of ammunition. And, we hate to see what happened to him, but stuff happens.
I just, one quick, Sheridan, I haven't forgotten you, but let me just make 2 quick points. One is, in terms of following the money, the best way to follow money is through an intelligence or a fusion center. And there are 2 in the Caribbean. There is one in St. Martin. It's called the St. Martin Intelligence Center. And there's one in Trinidad called Regional Intel Fusion Center. They're responsible for gathering, sharing, and analyzing information. I don't know how effective they've been. In fact, I haven't heard anything about them except when there was a grand opening. Apparently there was a grand closing, because I haven't heard anything. So, Mr. Bagan, if you have any information about the one in Trinidad, that would be greatly appreciated. And then the second point is Mr. Basil Carvalho. He was asking about inspector generals in the region. I'm not aware of any. And he also asked about online anonymous reporting. If that's within country, again, because, let's face it, most of these countries, they have a very corrupt element, and it sometimes goes all the way to the top. People are afraid because people have lost their lives reporting, and then they disappear. So, Sheridan, you were about to say something.
Yes, I was saying, and thanks a lot, Radigan. I think maybe you can assist us in developing this regional approach, to accessing the whistleblower statute, because it seems to me that we're going to need that. Because here in Dominica, for example, I'll give you 2 instances. We have a procurement act, but the government does not respect that. I mean, there's nothing intended. Somebody's been asked to build an international airport, and then they're going to front load it with money that's coming from we don't know where, and then they're going to sell passports to recover that money. We have no idea where all this money is going to. There's a gentleman who was given a diplomatic passport. His name was Alireza Mofrared. He's now in jail in Iran. He was a diplomat, a Dominican diplomat, of him.
Mm-hmm.
He sat next to the prime minister. He lived next to the prime minister's home in Dominica for about 3 or 4 months, until the Iranian government put out a thing for him, and then they sent him to the Dominican Republic. Then he was deported to Iran, where he is now sitting in jail, right? Because they were on the high seas, trading in oil, and the Americans had the sanctions again, so they were sanctions busting. I don't know how we're going to find all this money that Dominica made from this. And then, of course, because these people are selling all these passports, all these projects, all these hospitals and clinics and roads are being done. I mean, absolutely no tenders. So it's just given to these foreign contractors. They hardly employ Dominicans. Then all this money is somewhere, and from what they was reported in the parliament and what has not been accounted for in the treasury, there's a difference of about $4.2 billion. We need to find that. So the best way to find that, I imagine, is through this Whistleblowers Act. If somebody inside could get something for blowing the whistle so he can find this money. Otherwise, this thing is going to continue. I mean, they're still just putting out this thing, no tenders or projects are going on. So I think I certainly agree with Dr. Nelson that we can develop a regional approach to accessing that kind of assistance. And so that's one of the things I wanted to put there. Maybe we can look at that, but I think I like the idea of the regional approach, because a small island like Dominica, you can't do most of these things on your own. It's not going to be possible. The place is so small, everybody knows each other, everybody looking for favors with the politicians, and people are afraid to speak, they're scared for their jobs, they're scared for the scholarships for their children. And so we need that kind of a system. But I think it is best that we do a regional approach to this thing.
Well, Mr. Bagan, following up on Sheridan's point, do you know anything about this Intel Center in Trinidad? Because this would seem like the ideal vehicle to implement this regional approach.
Well, you can reach out to them. I've been to the building in Port of Spain. It's the size of some people's a spacious house, but it's not like they don't have that many staff or resources. Most of the people working there are seconded from the police services of different countries. So again, if they did make a major anti-corruption push, they'll have some salary connection to their home country. They're still at risk. So, and I've never heard of them, not to knock their integrity or anything, but I've never heard of them providing information that was critical in a case, or referring a file to the police in Trinidad that hit a politician. So, I mean, I do know that they integrate, they do have an AFIS system. I did talk to them about that tracks millions of airline passengers entering and leaving the Caribbean. They share information about terrorists, or terrorists, criminals coming in with the local police of each country. I think that's what their fusion intelligence system is more oriented towards, like border protection. I don't think they're really that interested in anti-corruption. My opinion, of course, I'm not an expert on this.
Well,
yes.
Let me just say this. We had a brief discussion on that with the CARICOM Secretariat, former Assistant General Counsel this morning. That fusion center was put together for the 2007 Cricket World Cup. And at that point, everybody was all hands on deck, and there was a lot of screening going on, looking mainly for terrorists and for other undesirables entering the Caribbean space. Because, they had the World Cup at the different venues, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados. Now, since the World Cup has passed, they really have not, there's one in Barbados too, by the way, and since the World Cup has passed, they really have not put it to the type of utilization that can happen. And keep this in mind, governments in the Caribbean really and truly does not want anybody with the power to probe their own backgrounds or their friends or anybody else. And that's what we're up against. You can have a fusion center, and we can have the proposal in 2018 in Jamaica that when I was with Cyberpol was that they're going to build a SOC, and the SOC itself can monitor the entire Caribbean, even the US, which is what was his intent. But the SOC is accompanied by individual fusion centers. It was supposed to be Cornwall, Middlesex, and Surrey. We were losing, or the government was losing a lot of cases because police officers sold the cases and they didn't show up in court, or if they showed up, they didn't have a case file. So in order to resolve that, the fusion center itself would have pulled together all the evidence, established a secondary case file, primary being with the investigator. And when it came to time for him to go to court, he would have a case file to show up in court. And that would have been checked out by the Fusion Center prior to the court day. Now, we proposed that, but for some reason, it never came to fruition. So this is where we are now, where I would like to go back to something briefly here. Al Jazeera did this investigation in Grenada and Dominica. Is that right, Mr. Gregor?
That's right.
Okay. And they found that the Grenadian prime minister had sold property, beachfront property, had sold it all. A citizen could not encroach on beachfront because it belonged to somebody that had been sold. But then Al Jazeera had set up the sting operations and caught all these senior people on video, voice, the whole works. But the problem is, and what I've asked CARICOM before, you need to have the CCJ with the power to prosecute prime ministers, and I'm not sure if the legislation has ever been put in. Maybe Jonathan can answer that, right?
So most of the region, the CCJ is not the final court. It still goes to the Privy Council, and it's an appellate court. So that's two jurisdictions. It deals with the trade treaty for the CSME and, well, the structures of CARICOM, if you wanted to sue structures of CARICOM. And then it's an appellate court for Dominica and several other countries, I think Guyana as well, where you have to go through the magistrate's court, it's usually then the High Court, then the Court of Appeal. Then after about 8 years, you reach the CCJ. So CCJ is, they're kind of like the Queen of England in a palace. It takes a long time to get to them. They do good work. I've been before them. But I did raise, I do believe they can produce work as good as the Privy Council, but my concern is with the amount of AK-47s and M16s and AR-15s on the streets in Trinidad. If we did ever get a really serious Don or mafia boss before them, we need, and of course Trinidad's police service is not the best, as I've highlighted the Stanley John report into firearm license corruption. Are we going to put all our judges in bulletproof vehicles to and from the court? If we have some serious concerns.
Now, well, let me just add something to that. 2 cases went up to the CCJ from Dominica. It was about bribery and treating, again, because of election problems. The CCJ took a decision, okay, you know something, this thing must go back to the court in Dominica to be heard, because it's supposed to be heard. And then within 2 to 3 weeks, the Director of Public Prosecution nully prosecuted the case. So
was that Cara Shillingsford's case?
That was Cara Shillingford's case.
Cara Shillingford is my best friend, actually.
Right. She's my attorney. She's my attorney.
Well, we're good. So,
right.
Yeah.
So you see, this is one of the things, and that's why I'm very cautious about this thing, because another case, election petition again, you have to file that within a few days after the election, is 7 years. The case cannot be heard in the court. How can you tell me that you have a case of election and you have a government that's sitting there, and in fact, maybe the court might find that, hey, you're not supposed to be there, and then it's 7 years and the case can't be heard. So I'm a little cautious about how much of a job the CCJ, how much power it really has in our region. And again, go right ahead.
Well, I would say it's not the CCJ's fault. Remember, they are attached onto the top of whatever court is in each country. So you have to fix the court in each country first.
That is the problem. You're not going to be able to do that, because I'll tell you, the politicians have a way. There's a lot of cocktails going on in the region. And these judges are attending a lot of cocktails. We've had a judge in Dominica that has been there for, normally you get a judge in a jurisdiction a certain number of years and you move. You don't want them to get too familiar and to get, this judge has been there forever. I think they finally are moving her after many, many years, but it's become a real problem in terms of the way she was prosecuting. So I think this is an area that we have to look at. And that is why I like the idea of and seeing how my brother Radican can help us with this. I like this whistleblower statute concept. I don't think we can do so. We can use. You see, we're talking about this institution in Trinidad. I think it may have to be outside, because there's no way you can protect. If you look at the IPOs in the region, they can't function because they're appointed by the prime ministers, they're appointed by the president on the advice of the prime ministers or something. And then if they take them to court because they're not giving the returns, and they're buying up property all over the place, which is what is happening, which you cannot justify with their normal salaries. When the IPO asks them for here, well, give us the return so we can see all the accounts, and they simply dissolve it and appoint your people. So it seems to me that we cannot depend on some of these internal institutions, no matter how good their intentions are.
What are the reasons why myself and the special agent in Jamaica decided that we needed to really look at return on investment? Was because he was trying to find some link to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, where monies that the US granted to institutions there, government or otherwise, where they were actually misutilizing the funds. And why the representative from State Department couldn't answer the question right off the bat. I surmise that they should have something in place to measure results from funding. Now, you're not going to give 100 million and not know what it's going to be utilized for. The question is, you've given it, now the purpose for which you gave it, was that accomplished? That's one of the things that needs to be examined. And that's what we were trying to examine from 2016 on.
Well, let me just say it's 2 minutes to 6, and we have to actually wrap up right now. We're going to ask all speakers to have a closing remarks. We'll shut down the live stream and recording, and then we can continue on the platform. But we just want to close officially and shut down recording and shut down the live stream. So maybe all the speakers here can give some closing remarks.
Okay.
Well, can I just say that I was very pleased to be here, Dr. Nelson. Thanks for inviting me. I thought the conversation was very enlightening. Happy to have a presentation from Secretary Feinstein. And I really wish that we would continue to connect. And I like the approach that you're suggesting. Let's look at a regional approach to some of these issues. Because, I mean, certainly when you come to clean air or, renewable energy, I mean, we have to look at our space in there. We can take a regional approach to that. We have a question of campaign finance. We need some serious campaign finance reform in some of those regions. And then I think Jamaica has done some work on that on one or two of the islands. We are way behind in Dominica. I think we can work on some of those things together in our space. And so I believe there are things that we can work on. And I really would like our NGOs, civil society in the region to start collaborating a little bit more closely. Because I think if we work together in our space, then I think we can do better. And as far as the media is concerned, Zara, we really would like to work with you, because I can see your concerns are just as much as ours. Because, I mean, we have problems. In my radio, I'm telling you, we're the only free radio station in Dominica, and they're trying to close us down for years. That is what is happening. And so our journalists have to be protected. I mean, they have to be trained, and because, these young people, they're going to get jittery very quickly because, politicians will call them and say, and they have scholarships available for family members and so on. So it's a small society. I certainly think that as media, it would be good for us. It would help us a lot if we would work together in the region. So thanks a lot, Dr. Nelson, for inviting me, and thanks a lot, guys.
No problem, Mr. Bagan.
So were we wrapping up? I was just sending a message to my friend Karashan. Are we wrapping up?
Okay. Yeah.
We're still gonna be here. We're still gonna be here. So
okay.
Responds to you can still talk to her.
But I'm gonna have to leave, huh? So I'll have to leave in a minute.
No problem.
Okay, I was just telling Cara, I was talking to Sheridan here. So yeah, I do believe we do need stronger funding from the US for civil society, as we see with Sheridan. He's fighting a corrupt government. In Trinidad, we have a lot of almost as much guns as Jamaica now. So journalists have to worry about assassinations, and lawyers too. They assassinated one of our law lecturers, Dana Sitahal. She was prosecuting a high profile case. So we do need I would think the US government may have to take a stronger role in if they can identify specific mafia bosses, probably pass legislation where they can extradite the biggest mafia bosses in these countries. And of course, they're going to be sending their money to the US or Europe. So it will touch and concern the US eventually. And well, the drug trafficking, drugs from South America into United States. So they can start to arrest some of these people every few years, it would help the corruption and crime situation enormously.
Ms. Burton,
Yes.
your final remarks before we
Are you
go
guys
off.
hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Final remarks would be that we're small societies. At the end of the day, we have to live here. And at the end of the day as well, there are going to be some of us that have to take a stand and be able to have the support of whether it's our Caribbean neighbors, the places that we live especially, and maybe, as you point out, the US government needs to play more of a role in helping to protect these kinds of freedoms that we now experience, because that idea of assassination of somebody prosecuting crime, I mean, that is just, that's awful, right? That's really awful, and that speaks to where we are as a set of countries that are fledgling democracies. From my end, free press is so sacrosanct in terms of helping us to advance as societies. And so, again, I repeat the call that if there are people on this call who have expertise, whether it's in anti-corruption, whatever the expertise is, when journalists call you, stop being so timid and stand with us, and also voice your opinions, get your comments published so that it can bolster the viewpoints of the experts and not just cower in the corner like so many people here that have to live here do. Again, also, if there are people on this panel who want to join in terms of writing and reporting and investigating and join me in that endeavor, I'm very keen to have that. But broadly speaking, I think as a diaspora, the way that you guys can also help is, in addition to that 2023 fund that might be on the way with, you know, defamation help, if you get a demand letter from an individual demanding it to retract, apologize, or they'll sue, or that kind of thing, you know, that kind of legal support, that's important. But to Mr. Collins' point about the media host taking the government to courts regarding the fact that ExxonMobil is not paying any income taxes, I think that that is very interesting. And I think some of us in civil society and also within the journalism fields need the support in terms of a fund that we can go after proactively, not just reactively, like in the case of a journalist that's about to get sued, but also proactively, where we see things just like that entity in Guyana. You see things and they're not right. We need to be able to fund those kinds of lawsuits to bring transparency to government so that we can strengthen our democracies as a region.
Thank you so much. Mr. Nelson.
Yes, sir. I recall what Colonel Liverpool had to say this morning about trying to form a CARIPOL, Caribbean police unit that could do adequate investigations. One of the things that he did not touch on was the capability of U.S. Southern Command, their J2, they can collect all the intel on every head of government, every national security minister. They have it because they have made statements in their newsletters that calls out heads of states in the Caribbean as being corrupt and being involved in money laundering. Now, if the military in the Caribbean for the US can do this, why is it not there a follow-up with prosecutions through DOJ? When DOJ wanted to do this, they sent the warrant down and they insisted that he be arrested and be delivered to them. And all hell broke loose behind that. So as far as I'm concerned, the US Southcom I've been trying to get them to be a part of this for quite a while, and it has not happened, right? Everybody wants hands off when you're starting to get too close.
Yeah.
But the issue is, and I know these guys, I worked with them for 24 years. I was in US Southcom in my earlier days, right? And I can say to you, they can bring a lot of stuff to close. They can put it all out to you, Zara. If they wanted to do like what Julian Assange did with the diplomatic cables, they could deliver this to you and you could clean up the entire Caribbean. But I don't know if they want that to happen, right? We know when the new ambassador from the US came to Jamaica, we know he had so much on the, I should say, you just simply say the Prime Minister's office, that he got carte blanche, whatever he wanted. But in turn, he put a stop to the activities of the NIA.
Herb, can you hurry up and just finish the point?
Yeah. But the issue is, we're the diaspora. We either have the US government, meaning state and DOJ, behind us if we're going to do this kind of stuff, or not. And if we don't have them behind us, then we have to seek a third party to be able to get intelligence that we need to act on. And then they're going to want to join us if we're going to take some direct action of some kind. So that's my 10 cents worth.
All right, I'll give you my 2 cents. Yeah, look, I just want to thank everyone for being here. You could have been anywhere else, but you've taken the time out because these issues that we're discussing, they're of utmost importance, not just to us, but for future generations. And we're all patriots here. We could be, doing something as, business or whatever, but we have taken a concerted effort to ensure that our soils, our homelands, that even if we don't see changes within our lifetimes, we're trying to make it a better place for the generations to follow. I've always said that, anyone who gets rich, and I think I said that at the beginning, anyone who gets rich by being a politician is a criminal. And I firmly believe that. And so if you start with that premise, then I think what we ought to do is we ought to have a discussion with the US. And what do I mean by that? WikiLeaks demonstrated to us that the American government knows everything that's going on in these countries. I knew it beforehand, but the general public, they got a sense of it through WikiLeaks because all of these cables are written by people who are placed in these countries to collect information, and the information comes to Washington and it gets into that mixer and they do whatever they need to do. But for geopolitical reasons, some people are not investigated. So I think now that we have the attention of the Madam Secretary Feinstein, she mentioned that, look, here are some things you can do. You can, the US government, once they provided with the evidence, they can send a letter to the government, the Marsh. You can have private sector engagement. You can deal with civil society, fund civil society in terms of transparency. They'll provide media training. They'll provide technical support. They'll even provide you with advisors to say, look, here's how you deal with this. And they will have direct interaction with those heads of state in the Caribbean. So like Claire mentioned, we need to have a regional approach. It shouldn't be country by country. And I think we have the perfect avenue because, we now have an audience with this lady. And I say, let's travel down that road, at least for now. I mean, we have the intelligence centers in the Caribbean, but based on what we've heard, they're not up to snuff. We can explore that, but I think the hot topic right now is how do we engage with the secretary and hold her feet to the fire to get some of these things done. And also the whistleblower and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. These are things that we can use, and also figure out how we can get the U.S. government, to prosecute some of the cases that individuals cannot finance themselves in these countries. So I want to thank everyone again for being here. It's a learning experience for me. I've never failed to learn whenever I come on to these programs, because there's always somebody with some point that I never thought about, and today was no exception. So if those of you who would like to stay beyond the taping